you can hear me.
Yes.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, let's begin. Now, last time we talked about how certain different goods have different elasticities of demand and supply. This time we talk about supply and demand in the market and how the government would interact with it, how the government intervenes in the market, and certain basic tools available to the government, and how each of these tools would affect supply side, demand side, and generally change the market dynamics. Most of you have taken EC 201, so you know about supply curve, demand curve. This time, it's about how government plays with them. We have basic tools available to the government. Price controls. These are the most basic tools, price ceiling and price floor, and a more, I don't want to say advanced tool, a more effective tool, which is very common, is tax. Price control have two parts: price ceiling, the legal maximum on the price at which a good can be sold. When I introduce, let's assume I am the king of some country, and I would introduce the price ceiling. That means people in this country can trade, but the price of the certain good that I put a ceiling on cannot go above a certain threshold. If you sell your good, let's say I say price ceiling for water is $2 a bottle. If the price of a bottle is $3, you'll go to jail. You have to you're legally bound to not go above the maximum. Price floor is the opposite. I would introduce a legal minimum on the price at which a good can be sold. For example, the minimum wage law. Remember, in the labor market, we are the suppliers. We rent our time, our labor, our talent, our skills to corporations. They would hire us. So when the government introduces a price floor, it means that the corporation who is buying my time and my skills has to at least pay me this much. The price can be higher, cannot be lower. It must be at least this much. And taxes, well, taxes. Government can make buyers or sellers pay a specific amount on each unit. You'll be given, let's say, a $10 tax for your, where's my phone? Okay, my phone was just here. Let's say this is my phone. You have a 10% sales tax for a phone. That means the government will make you pay 10% of its price to the government as tax. Okay. The most useful way of like price ceiling policy right now is rent control. Let's look at this. Local ordinances that limit rent increases for some rental housing units, such as in New York or San Francisco, have had a positive impact over the past 3 decades on the amount, the quantity, and quality of affordable housing in cities that use them. As you can see, 95% of economists, they disagree. They say rent control policies didn't help with quantity nor quality of housing. Why would that happen? I'm asking you. Why do you think that such thing would happen? For example, in New York or San Francisco. Anyone? Why would rent control policies end up hurting the quantity and quality of low-income housing or affordable housing? Let's say I'm a billionaire investor in housing. I want to build houses. Why would I want to do that? Because I like to help people? Could be. Because I'm a good person? It could be. But what's guaranteed is that I want profits. I'm looking to make more money. The reason I'm entering the housing market is to make more money. So I would look at the numbers. If I build, let's say, 100 apartments, I'm going to rent it out to 100 new young people who move to this city to work, and they're going to pay me, and I'm going to make a lot of money that would make my initial investment reasonable. But then if the politicians put a rent control in place, I would say, okay, then I wouldn't be able to charge them as much. I wouldn't be able to charge them the reasonable price that would make my investment profitable. Instead, I could go build a casino, or I could go build luxury houses or beachside property, something that I can charge people the way I want to. This policy would discourage new investors entering the market. Also, that's the quantity. Also, the quality will not improve. Why? Because let's say I'm already in the market. Why would I want to increase the quality of my apartments? Why would I need to refurniture them or make them prettier or make them more fancy, add a new air conditioning system, things like that? Why should I do that when I cannot actually make that money come back? When I know that my price is fixed and also my competitors are going out. That first billionaire, he's not coming in. So I won't have that many competitors. There is no reason for me to do it. So housing not only is limited, but also will continually degrade over time. Quality will go down and down and down because there is no profit to be made. So that's one side of the argument. But then many of us agree with this policy. We're all young. Most of us probably don't own a house, so we have to rent a place, and we won't have a house for some time. So it is in our interests. Why is that? Why do some people think rent control benefits them? At least in the short term. Like, I'm pretty sure at least half of us agree with this policy right now. And it's perfectly fine. There is a really reasonable economic explanation for it. Like, you're not mistaken. Remember, in economics, there's no right or wrong answer. There's only winners and losers. So why would someone agree with this? Morality cannot be overcharged, like from the overcharged discussion from last chapter. Exactly. It goes back to last chapter. Housing, if you remember, has a very low price elasticity of demand. It's very inelastic. A landlord has much more power over me than I have power over him. I cannot tell my landlord that if you don't reduce my rent, I'll leave. Why? Because there are other people who rent my place. But my landlord can tell me, I'll double your rent. And I have to think about this. If he doubles my rent, I have to leave. I have to move. I have to carry all my furniture. It takes a long time. I'm busy, I'm working, my wife's busy, she's working. My kids go to school in this neighborhood. I don't have any kids, but let's assume. So the problem here is that my hands are tied. My demand is inelastic. Back to last session. So some people believe when demand is inelastic, you need to intervene and help the demand side to protect the person who cannot protect himself against the big guy, the landlord. Especially this situation is uh, amplified when you consider landlords could band together. There are only a few landlords, a few corporations with big housing units, and many of us. It's easier for them to band together and increase their prices altogether. And if they do that, I can't even move. I just have to pay them. I cannot be a homeless person. If you're homeless, you won't be able to work. I cannot be homeless and like have Zoom meetings. It would be extremely difficult to continue function as a useful and efficient member of the society if you're homeless. Some people can still do that, but it's extremely difficult. So my hands again are tied. So it's a reasonable idea to ask governments to intervene and protect the little guy against the big guy, to have a fairer market outcome. Let's look at what happened. When there is no government intervention, let's assume this is Raleigh. There are 300 apartments available, and the rent of each apartment is $800. Now, this number is just not some made-up number. This number is the result of many negotiations, many smart people fighting over profits, haggling, negotiating, looking for cheaper suppliers, looking for cheaper material to build houses, looking for the most efficient technology. All of this comes together to give us this outcome. $800 monthly rent, and 300 apartments, rently months. That was worthy of remembrance. So in the first scenario, we had no government intervention, but now there is a government intervention here happening. Government arrives and tell people, okay, now you have price ceiling, meaning that price cannot go above. Remember, ceiling above, you cannot go above. Floor below, I cannot go below my floor. I'll end up in my neighbors. So there is a price ceiling of $1,000, meaning that no landlord can increase his monthly rent more than $1,000. But then landlords say, fine. Why? Because it doesn't matter. The equilibrium price is already lower. If you look at here, one second, let me get my digital pen. If you look here, got demand, supply. This is demand. This is us looking for a place to stay, house to live. These are the companies that are building houses. We start negotiating. We want lower price. They want higher price. We start negotiating. I have to agree to a higher price. They have to agree to a lower price. and we end up in an equilibrium. Now, this is the price at which suppliers can make the most money and we can pay the least rent. This is when you can actually mathematically show that this maximizes each of our welfare. This maximizes my interests and their interests. For both of us, this is the best outcome that we can possibly hope. But then government says, okay, rent cannot go above this. Landlord would say, no problem, because already my best interest is here. I don't need to go here. And I will definitely don't need to go above. My best interest is in this price. I don't need to go above this. So this is called not binding. It's not important. It doesn't matter. Not binding has no effect on the market outcome. It's just something there for formality, or just as a decorate. It's something that usually politicians do just to do something when something is not binding. But then, let's say another person, another politician runs for office and says, if you elect me, I will reduce price ceiling even more. Same market, again, the best interests of me and my landlord, thanks to our negotiations, is here. This point. Now the politician would says there is a price floor, price ceiling of $500. That means my rent cannot go above it. Well, before my rent was here, now legally my rent should be here. Who is happy? I'm very happy. I'm going to save $300 a month. But now, what happens? When this is happening, suppliers leave the market. I would say it's not in my interest anymore. If I was a billionaire investor in housing, I would leave the market. I'll go do something else with my money. So I'll leave the market. Also, word gets out. Lots of people hear that in Raleigh, rent prices went down a lot. They crashed. A lot of people moved to Raleigh to enjoy the cheaper housing prices. Demand will go up. Supply, only this much. At this price, only these many houses are available to rent, because it's not profitable for producers to produce more and more and more, build more housing. Demand goes up. Lots of people move to Raleigh to enjoy the low rents. What happens is there is a gap between supply and demand. There are a lot of demand and too few supply, too little supply. These cannot meet each other. We call this shortage. There is a lot of supply, there's a lot of demand, too few supply. And to make it even worse, as time goes by, remember, in the long term, elasticities are bigger. Supply and demand will be more elastic. So in the long term, this is what happens. what happens in the long term is that supply would be more like this, demand would be more like this. It will be more elastic. Remember, the more vertical a curve is, the more inelastic it is. This is not elastic, this is inelastic. As time goes by, we become more elastic. We have time to think, we have time to prepare. More people have heard the news, they're moving to Raleigh, more investors are leaving town. So now the gap only gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Shortage will go bigger and bigger and bigger. It only makes things worse. And what would shortage in housing cause? Homelessness. As time goes by, homelessness crisis only gets worse. In the long run, supply and demand of rental apartments are more price elastic, so the shortage is larger. This is why the homelessness crisis is just getting worse in some places. Because time goes by, fewer people are willing to engage in the market and build housing, and more people are moving to enjoy the cheap housing, so things will only get worse. Because of shortages, sellers must ration the goods among buyers. Some rationing mechanisms are available. Most famous, long lines. There was a famous aspect of life in Soviet Union was waiting in long lines. Because prices were fixed by the government, they had a communist style of government. Prices couldn't be decided in the market by supply and demand. Therefore, there was always a shortage. People had to stand in line for everything. Rationing. There's actually a joke made by President Reagan, Ronald Reagan. He says that in Soviet Union, there's a 7-year wait for a new car. So if you want to buy a new car, you have to pay and then wait for 7 years, because there are too many people wanting to buy a new car and only a few companies manufacturing. So you have to wait for 7 years. And there is a person who goes to buy a car, he pays and he says, okay, I want my car. And the salesman would say, come back in 7 years. The buyer answers, morning or afternoon. The seller says, in 7 years, what does it make? How does it make a difference? The buyer says, because in the morning, the plumber is coming. So long lines was so famous, people made fun of it. There were lots of other. I can continue making telling you jokes about long lines in Soviet Union. They were famous. Also, Soviet Union was actually a really good example of rationing. They were really good at it. There was no bias. People were equal. In most situations, when there is a shortage, discrimination follows. Especially in poor, less developed countries, when there is a shortage, bureaucrats favor their own. Discrimination according to sellers' biases. I would only give what's available to my own racial group, to my own religion, to my own cousins, to my own tribe, to my own city. And trust me, people are really good at finding reasons to discriminate against each other. So when there is a shortage, bad things would always follow. And these are often unfair and inefficient. The goods do not necessarily go to the buyers who value them most highly. If you let the market run its own course, people who need a car the most are willing to pay the highest price for it. The manufacturer will be able to make a lot of money by selling that car. to these people. Then the manufacturer can use that money to produce even more cars, to build another plant, a new factory, hire more people, and then sell even more cars. So in the long run, everyone would be better off. But if you leave the long lines just be there, as time goes by, just supply and demand becomes more elastic, situation will only deteriorate. The goods do not necessarily go to the buyers who value them most highly. Another famous example, this time we're talking about price floor, market for unskilled labor. In the employment market, we are the supplier, me and you. We supply our time, our talent. Corporations are the consumers. Usually it's the opposite. Usually it's me buying services or goods made by a giant corporation. But in this case, it's me who is selling and the corporation is buying. At equilibrium, price is the result of a lot of negotiations, lots of haggling. I would say, okay, I would work for this price. I want a higher salary. I want here. Corporations want to hire me for free. They're here. We start negotiating. They agree to pay me more. I agree to work for less. We continue haggling until we arrive at this point. This is our equilibrium. We shake hands. I start working for them. I have a contract. I would work for them. This is how the price is decided in the market. Again, this is not some made up thing. It's not just something that can be decided with a toss of a coin. This is the result of rational, smart people who are professional in their own field, negotiating with each other, trying to maximize their own benefits. Now, let's say this is the labor market. We negotiated at this price. And then the government would arrive and says, okay, I'm going to introduce a price floor, meaning that you cannot go below it at this level. Let's say 500. Corporations would say, okay, we don't care. Because already they're paying us more. We also say, okay, we don't care because we're already receiving more. No one cares about this law, and it's non-binding. At this point, price is not binding. It has no effects. But then, when the government actually changes things, I don't like these numbers. Let's say we're talking about hourly wage. The government says $7.25 an hour is the minimum wage, while corporations were paying on equilibrium $6 an hour. What happens here is that now corporations are legally bound to pay at least this amount, at least. Demand side, these are corporations. Supply side, worker. What happens here? This is now binding. Now everybody cares. First of all, I'll be happy. As a worker, I'll be very happy. I'm getting paid more. Thank you, Mr. Politician or Mrs. Politician. Corporations will be very sad. They cannot pay us the low wages they used to. But then, what happens is that corporations would stop hiring because it's no longer profitable for them to hire these many people at this price. This number, 500 people, was only profitable at this price. If they're supposed to pay us 7.25, they're only willing to hire this few, let's say 120 people, 125 people. On the other hand, lots of people who were in college, who were not working, who were stay-at-home moms or stay-at-home dads, now they enter the workforce. Now they increase supply. Now they have more reason. When I'm being paid more, let's say I stay home and I'm raising my children, but now I hear that minimum wage went up, so now I can go to work and then afford a babysitter for my children. Now I would go to work. Supply goes up, demand goes down, and there will be a gap. In this gap, a lot of people are willing to work and only a few corporations are hiring. Can you tell me what's this gap called? Surplus. Yes. Surplus of labor. We have a very ominous and not really likable word for it, which is many people are really afraid of this word: unemployment. Unemployment can be a disaster. And unemployment is nothing but surplus of labor. All these people here, all these people are willing to work, but there is no work. They get angry, they get sad, they cannot afford their houses, they lose their houses, they become homeless, they cannot afford to send their kids to school, their children won't have enough education, generation after generation will be hurt. So unemployment is a huge disaster. Labor supply, as you can see, the price floor is binding. It would cause a surplus. Minimum wage laws do not affect highly skilled worker directly. They do affect teenage workers. A 10% increase in the minimum wage raises teenage unemployment by 1 to 3%. Of course, this is only work in a rich country like the United States. I don't even think that this statement would be true for Europe. At some levels, when minimum wages rise very seriously, they would cause mass unemployment. What happens, for example, if the minimum wage would go up to, let's say, $30 or $40, factories, entire factories would close down. When a factory closes down, you not only fire your workers, but when the factory closes down, you don't even need the engineers, you don't need the technicians. So even your skilled laborers are laid off. Same thing happened in Iran 15 years ago. During there was this politician guy who got elected, and he was trying to solve the whole world's problem, obviously. So he overnight increased minimum wage by like 40%, and industries disappeared. Like I myself saw the canning industry, like his fruit cans and tomato paste cans. They use steel to produce cans. They all disappeared overnight, gone. When factories shut down, they fire their unskilled laborers, their workers first. After that, they go after their skilled laborers. You don't need an engineer. You don't need the executive. You don't need anybody when you're not working. So you would even hire the CEO. That you would even fire the CEO. Everyone will lose his job. So minimum wage, if not done correctly, could cause a disaster. If the federal minimum wage is raised, here's the secret, gradually to $15 per hour by 2020, we are in 2020, the employment rate for low-wage US workers will be substantially lower than it would be under the status quo. Meaning that if you gradually increase minimum wage to $15, unemployment rate for unskilled workers would go up a lot more. As you can see, 30% of economists disagree, almost 35 agree, and almost 40% not certain. Why is that? Because many people believe that the current minimum wage, 7.25, is actually not binding. It's not really important. I think if I look at the numbers, I think about 10% or 15% or 20, I'm not sure. A very low portion of the US labor force is employed at the minimum wage. While in other countries, this portion is much higher. A lot of people, a lot more people are working at the minimum wage level. So many argue that minimum wage is not actually binding here. But then, if you want to intervene in the market, if you ever became a politician, you wanted to intervene in the market, please do it gradually. Why? Because if you do it overnight, at first, one disaster would happen, and it will only get worse because your elasticities will get bigger. So your surplus, your unemployment will get bigger, and your shortages, homelessness crisis will also get bigger. Do it gradually. Okay, here's an example. Market for hotel rooms in equilibrium. You have three different scenarios. First, price ceiling, $90, then a price floor, $90, and then a price floor, $120. In each case, first, find what's going to happen, if it is binding or non-binding. Then find if there is a surplus or shortage, and then how much. You have 5 minutes. Make sure you do this. This is a very straightforward and nice to work with example. 5 minutes. Okay, first one, a $90 price ceiling. What does price ceiling means? We cannot go above. So this is 90, and this is our price ceiling. Tell me, is this binding or non-binding? Anyone? This is binding, yes. Why? Because we cannot go above. While we were here, now we have to come back, come down. What happens here? First of all, lots of hotels will leave the market. It's not profitable for them anymore. So they only supply this much. Also, a lot of people will hear, oh my God, have you heard? Hotels are now much cheaper. Let's go see something. Let's go to Vegas. Let's go to Charleston. Let's go to LA. People would want to travel. Demand will go up. Supply would go down. Now you have something here. What's this called? Shortage. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Shortage. Why is shortage? If we deduct our demand from our supply, we can see that supply is equal to 90, while demand is 120. 90 minus 120. This is equal minus 30. So we have a negative surplus or a shortage of 30. This is our first case. Now, second case. A $90 price floor, meaning that prices cannot go below this. What happened? Meaning that prices cannot go below 90. Tell me, is this situation, if this is a price floor, it means that prices can never be less than 90. Prices always must be more than 90. Is this binding or non-binding? Excuse me. Been talking since morning. Non-binding, not binding, or not binding. Thank you. So here we're here, and it's just not important. Everyone will say, "Okay, thank you. We know you're helping, Mr. Politician. Thank you." But no one cares because it's not binding. But then $120 price floor here, meaning that prices cannot go below this. Prices should be maximum here. Minimum here. Prices must be always bigger than 120. This is our new situation. This is a new law. What happens here? Is this binding? It's a binding and creates a surplus. Exactly. What happens is that, first of all, people would leave the market. Demand side would go. Why? Because people are now facing higher prices, and people don't like higher prices, especially when it comes to traveling and vacationing. We don't need to go see Charleston, for example, or go see Vegas. You'd say, okay, don't worry about it, just stay home. So this is binding. Lots of people would leave the market. And then lots of hotels will open up. Lots of people would start renting their apartments on Airbnb, for example, to enjoy the big boost in prices and higher profits. What happens is that now you have a huge gap between supply and demand. And if you, again, deduct your supply from your demand, I'm sorry, it was deduct your demand from your supply, would be equal 120 minus 60. Your surplus would be 60. Is it always binding when it affects the market outcome? It's the opposite. When it affects the market outcome, it's always binding. Like something that's binding, it binds you to certain new reality. For example, I tell you that from next session, everyone must have their microphones unmuted and their cameras on. So it's it's binding now. Now you have to, like, I really don't want to do that, especially because you could be just in your house comfortable. I don't want people force people to actually dress up and be presentable for class. I'm not even presentable for the class. So if I tell you that, it would be binding. You have to change your behavior. But if I tell you everyone must be present and you could have your camera on or off, then it's non-binding. You don't have to change anything. You, like most people, their cameras are off, their microphones muted. Binding when it affects the market outcome. It binds you to a new reality, to a new situation. And also, I made a mistake here in drawing the demand curve. Demand curve is not like that. This demand curve for hotel rooms is more like this. It's more elastic because people really don't need to go on vacation. So they're very sensitive to prices. This is why, in this case, our surplus is huge compared to when our shortages were just 30. The reason the surplus is much bigger is because the price elasticity of demand is much higher. You can see the demand curve is much flatter than the supply curve. You don't need to worry about that. That's like very advanced. Just remember last lecture, our chapter 5 lecture, very important. So this is about price controls. Any questions? Am I making sense? Very nice. Let's move on. Markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity. Economists, they really love their supply and demand, and it's like our children. These cross here, this is like our child. We don't want people to intervene with his business. Let him do his thing, Mr. Government. Economists usually oppose price ceilings and price floors. Prices are not some made up thing. They're very important. Again, we really care about our prices. They have the crucial job of balancing supply and demand. Prices are not something that you can just change. A price is the result of lots of people who know their business, following their own interests, going to extreme efforts, working overtime, staying up the whole night trying to look for new ways to reduce their costs, doing lots of things to be able to maximize their profits, to be able to make more money. Like the other day, I had a friend of mine back in college who is now working as an engineer in a factory. He asked me about how I can, like, I'm trying to do some research for like improving my production line. How can I do it? Like he cared about this from all over all the other side of the world. He messaged me. He cared about this. And to think that some politician who doesn't know anything about this market can improve it just overnight, it's very risky. It could be right, but very risky. Do most economists not support government intervention since they are against price floors and ceilings? Um, that's a very complicated policy questions. The thing is, my own idea is that in the last few years, like let me like Bill Farrer has a comedy sketch on SNL on Thanksgiving, and he says about the comedy sketch he just made. He says, "What's going on? Is this 2014?" So the same thing applies to economists. In the past few years, things changed. Like especially since environmental discussions are in place now. Now the situation is different than before. Like 50 years ago, most economists would just the job of an economist was to just get the government out, just keep the government. We were like this, hold the door. We were the Hodor in Game of Thrones. Just hold the door, don't let the government in, let people do their own thing. But now that we're facing some new realities, like the environmental degradation, deforestation, water contaminations, all these things that are affecting other markets, there are lots of externalities. Also, we're seeing the widening income gap, like poor people are actually becoming poorer. All these years we were saying, wait a second, people are improving. But now we see, especially in other countries, in poorer countries, poor people are often going down. So now the situation is changing. So most economists, I don't know about most. I would say they used to. Now it's more like 50-50, since they are against price florism. Economists is the art of allocating resources. An economist only wants to maximize efficiency. We don't want to waste things. Like imagine you're sitting on a table eating dinner. Economist is the person who tells you, "Oh, you just like dropped your spoon. You wasted food." We don't want things to go to waste. We want to maximize efficiency. Stop playing with your phone. You're wasting time. Eat your food. Eat your vegetables. They're good for you. That's the thing an economist would think of. So the reason they are against price floors and price ceilings is because it hurts efficiency. It would create long lines and will only get worse. We want to make things better. We don't want to make things worse. Increasing elasticities, it only makes things worse. But now the situation is different. Now, especially these days, an economist must also think about the long term. Okay, I'm increasing efficiency in short term, but what about the long term? Now we're smarter. Now we can look deeper. So, did I answer your question? Or was I just rambling on and on? You're welcome. Okay. Economists usually oppose price ceilings and price floors. Prices are not the outcome of something just made up. As we said, prices have the crucial job of balancing supply and demand. They would coordinate economic activity. So, again, a price is something sacred in economics. It's the result of all the people working overtime, all the people studying hard to be able to find a new technology, all the people contacting their friends to reduce their costs, to improve their profits. It's important. It coordinates economic activity. And governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. You want to use price control because of unfair market outcomes. When we talked about rent control, we said sometimes landlords would band together and they would abuse the market. In those times, you need to bring in the government to protect you because of unfair market outcome. Or aimed at helping the poor. Again, economists used to be very rigid about market, and some would argue they would only see here up to their nose. But now we can see future generations. If you help the poor now, their children will not be poor, and they can in return they can be useful members of the society. They could invent things, and if not everyone can be an inventor, of course. At least they could be middle class. They could be even like at least lower middle class. They could produce things which would make us able to consume more, and we would increase the long-term efficiency of this society. So sometimes you would sacrifice the short-term society, the, the short-term efficiency of the society for long-term gains. It often, of course, it's about politicians, and everyone loves politicians. Why? Because they often hurt those they are trying to help. I don't know if I heard that correctly. There's a really good saying. It says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. A lot of people try to help, but they actually end up hurting people. Why? Because they don't know about elasticities. You intervene in housing market, introduce rent control to help poor people afford housing. But then elasticities would go up and up and up and up. And then you now have a huge homelessness crisis on your hands. Or other countries like Europe or Asia, you intervene in the market, increase minimum wage to help the people who are working at lower wages. And then there is a big, huge surplus of labor here, and it's only getting worse. So every year, unemployment is getting bigger and bigger. You would try to create economic growth, you can't. You would think about removing the minimum wage, you can't because everyone is used to it. And workers, union workers who are already employed, they would come to the street, they would protest, you would lose elections. So it's only a downward spiral. Things will only get worse and worse and worse. But then there are other ways of helping. Instead of forcing people at gunpoint to lower their rents, you could pay rent subsidies to low-income population. If you pay them rent subsidies, the landlord can follow his own business interests or her own business interests. The tenant would do the same, but then you would help the tenant by paying a portion of his or her rents. Instead of minimum wage, you could have wage subsidies or tax returns, in earned income tax credit. The government could help the low-income population by paying a portion of their wages. Mr. Corporation, you pay $10. That's your salary. That's all right. That's the market outcome. I'm not going to mess with that. You pay your $10. I, the government, would pay another $5. So Muhammad, the forklift operator, can earn $15 an hour. 5 from me, the government, 10 from you, the corporation. Put together, you have a nice wage, which is not messing up the market, and also helping the poor. Of course, these are, I don't know how to say it, these are easier said than done because, as often when you hear about government policies, as soon as you heard them, you have to ask, how are you paying for it? Rent subsidies need a lot of money. Who's going to pay taxes for it? The billionaires? Well, the billionaires aren't really fond of paying taxes. They tend to leave, they tend to get back at you for making them pay taxes. They tend to donate a lot of money to your opposition party. So these are not really easy. That's why they're not really common. Instead, some politicians would prefer to just go after one industry. For example, just go after housing industry. Just hurt them instead of taxing everyone and make everyone hate us. We could just go after housing industry. So these are advanced public policy debates. But then, even though these are options, but they're not really popular because they're really difficult to implement. So, everyone's favorite thing, taxes. Another tool that is available to the government is taxes. Taxes is used not to really help people. It could be indirectly, but the main purpose of taxes is to make money for the government. Government is like a company. The company needs some revenues. The company taxes us instead of like in exchange for services like the army, the law enforcement, roads, hospitals. Not hospitals here. Here, healthcare is. I still don't know how this healthcare system in this country works. Schools, roads, schools, and national defense. These are what government services are. And in order to benefit from these services, we need to pay for it because they cost money. Soldiers need salaries, armies, tanks, airplanes, aircraft carriers, they all cost a lot of money. Schools cost a lot of money. Roads need a lot of money to maintain. In order to raise revenues, governments use taxes. When I tax you, there is a manner in which the burden of a tax is shared. Now, this is what many people make a mistake. When, for example, I say there is a $10 tax for this phone here, you think that you're the only one who is paying this tax, but no. When there is a $10 tax on a good, like a cell phone, the burden of the tax is shared among participants in a market. The government can make the seller or the buyer to pay the tax. Yes, I will tell you that there's a 10% tax for this, or there's a $10 fixed tax. So if you buy a phone from your Apple store or from Amazon or from your phone company or a mobile phone provider, you'll have to pay a 10% tax for the phone you're buying. Or I could say, if the company is selling you a phone, the company has to pay 10% or $10 tax to me, the government. In both cases, the burden will end up being shared. Let's take a look at this example. Let's talk about pizza. This is my neighborhood Pizza Hut. They sell 500 pizzas every night and $10 a pizza for one pizza. $10 is the price. This is your supply. This is the Pizza Hut. This is us buying pizza when we're not feeling feel like cooking. Quantity, price. This is our equilibrium without government intervention. Anybody can go buy pizza, and pizza is not taxed. There is no price floor, no price ceiling, no price floor. and no tax. $10, 500 pizzas every night. Now, when there is a tax on buyers, let's say the government says now the buyers have to pay, let's $1.50. It would shift the demand curve down by the amount of the tax. So now this is the money that's going into the pizza. Now it will go down by the amount of the tax, 8.5. So our demand curve now shifts to the left. Remember, when there is a non-price determinant, demand curve and supply curves can shift. In this case, there is a non-price determinant called tax, which is hurting the consumer. It's something bad. I don't like to pay taxes. No one does. So when I'm introduced with taxes, my demand curve shifts left or go down the same. The price buyers pay is now 1.5 higher than the market price P. Price would have to fall by 1.5 to make buyers willing to buy the same quantity as before. So if price falls from 10 to 8.5, buyers are still willing to purchase 500 pizzas. A buyer is only willing to buy 500 pizzas. Let's assume this is me. I'm willing to buy 500 pizzas. Trust me, I am. Sometimes I'm so hungry, I'm willing to pay for 500 pizzas, but only if each pizza is $10. If it's more, if the price is higher, I'm not willing to pay for 500. I'm on this curve. This is my movement. So I'm only willing to pay for 500 if I'm here at 10. So the pizza salesman, in order to be able to satisfy my demand, needs to sell me at 8.5 because 1.5 is the tax. If you add it to 8.5, you have your old price, which is 10. So the salesman would have to give me this new price. But then Pizza Hut is not willing to sell at this price, these many. For Pizza Hut needs to fire one of its employees, reduce its production because it's no longer profitable for him to sell 500 at $10. What they do is that Pizza Hut moves along this curve. They would have to reduce their production to be able to stay profitable. Buyers are still willing to purchase 500 pizzas, yes, but then sellers would reduce their production to this much, 450. In the end, at 450, I'm willing to pay more. This will be our new equilibrium. This is the price I'm paying on my demand curve. This is the price Pizza Hut is receiving from me, and the rest, the difference between these two numbers, is the tax. This goes to the government. So this is what leaving my pocket. Leaving pocket. This price is what entering Pizza Hut register. The rest, this difference here, goes to the government. This is too messed up. So a tax is a bad thing. No one likes it. My demand curve would shift. There will be a new equilibrium. At this new equilibrium, I'm paying this much. Pizza Hut is receiving this much. And the difference between these two numbers will be the tax paid to the government. Now, the difference between them is the tax. In this case, you can see the burden of the tax is shared between me and Pizza Hut. We're both hurt. Even though I'm the one paying the tax, because now I reduce my consumption, Pizza Hut is also hurt. So Pizza Hut end up paying a portion of the tax. Now it's shared. Now, we're almost out of time. There is a way to find these numbers. It takes a lot of time for me to do it, and I will record it, put it on YouTube. You have to find the curves first, find the intercept, slopes, set the two curves equal. That's the general method on how to solve supply and demand curve, and how to find equilibriums, and how to work with taxes. It takes like 30 minutes for me to explain. So I'm going to record it on my own time and put it on the internet for you to watch. You watch it, and next time we see each other, we're going to solve this second example. So for now, let's just know the arguments behind taxes and what happens. For the mathematics behind it and technical issues, go on my YouTube channel, and don't forget to like and subscribe, as YouTubers often say. So thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Is there any questions? We're almost out of time, so if you want to leave, now leave, and have a nice weekend. And if you don't want to leave, if you have any questions, go ahead. I'm here.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. That's it. Any questions? There is no questions. You can always email, ask questions, ask for office hours. So if there's no questions, let me go and get me a coffee. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a nice weekend.